there is snow. And in Jerusalem, we get snow every 3 years, and it typically occurs in early March. Are we good? Okay. So, yes, there is a little bit of snow in Israel, and there's, of course, nothing like the snow here. It's wonderful to be in here and just look out. Isn't it just quite a view from here as we look out? I know there's a few more people coming in. Because of the weather, so I apologize to those who are home and who have been waiting patiently. So thank you for joining us. Last week, I want you to know, in total, following last week's session, we had 51 individual households or IP addresses watching this. So that's very nice. It's very nice to know that there's... I'm going to ask that we have Bibles today. Do we have Hebrew Bibles? Yes. We have? Good. Okay, wonderful. Well, I think while we're waiting, and I saw a few more people coming in, and I'm so grateful to you for coming in this cold weather and in the snow, and with the roads not yet being plowed. I'm grateful to all of you for being here. And before we start, let me just make a couple of announcements. The first relates to next week. Next week, we're going to hold a session, but we're not going to hold it here. We're going to hold it on Zoom. We're going to be on Zoom next week. And then we're going to return to being here. And on the 12th of February, second announcement, the Meshuggah notes are coming from Ohio State to the choir, and they're going to use this facility. They're going to use the chapel at 11 o'clock in the morning, so we're going to go back to Zoom. But we're going to be doing a little bit of a back and forth, and then we're going to mostly be meeting in person and mostly be meeting here, right? But in order to try to miss as few sessions as possible and to just not cancel them, we're going to start doing the alternative sessions via Zoom. So next week on Zoom, February 12th on Zoom, and there is a classroom that we can use, but the classrooms that we can use do not have streaming, so that the people who are watching us from home cannot see us. And the only way to do this is really to do it on Zoom, right? So that everybody can join in. And that's really what we're going to be doing. Okay, so that's the plan for the time being, and it really is all a work in progress. We're going to figure this out. Okay, well, let's continue where we left off, and let's remind ourselves of where we were when we left off. And today is going to be our last full session that is dedicated to the Baruch Hu. But let's talk about where we were and where we are and what we are doing. And let's review a little bit of what we did here with regard to the Baruch Hu, and with my apologies again for the projector going out and us using this screen. But you can you see it? Is this large enough? You can, okay, good. So we identified the Baruch Hu as a really special moment. You know, we generally start to say the Baruch Hu and we just say it. And it's our preparation, as it were, for the prayer, and we just say it. But the Baruch Hu is a really special moment. And how do we know special moments? We know special moments in a number of ways. Yes, there is the notion of physical movement, but first of all, the rabbis write a certain sense of rules, of certain requirements and rules with regard to being able to hear it. And what happens if you don't hear it? And do you discharge your obligation if you don't hear the Baruch Hu? Right? There's a whole discussion about being able to hear it, being able to participate in it, being able to respond to it, what happens when you don't, whether there's an opportunity for you to make up for not having heard it. There are certain prayers and blessings with regard to which there are special rules. The Baruch Hu is one of them. So we know that there's something special about the Baruch Hu, because the rabbis go on and on about what happens when you hear it, when you don't hear it, when you come in, when you only hear half of it. There's a whole discussion about that, which indicates to us there is something special and unique about the Baruch Hu. It's among those very special groups of prayers and blessings. Then there is the notion of the physical movement that's associated with the Baruch Hu. We stand up, we bow down, right? There are special things about the Baruch Hu that are taking place physically. It's not true for all blessings. It's not true for all prayers, but it is true for the Baruch Hu. And that again is an indication of something special about this prayer and blessing. And we talked about this. And then there is a third element, and that is the minyan. The Baruch Hu requires a minyan. It requires a quorum of 10. Not every prayer or blessing requires a quorum of 10. So there's something special about this, about the Baruch Hu, right? And we talked about the Baruch Hu, and we talked about this notion of community, and we talked about where it comes from, and we saw the book of Chronicles, which we're going to go back to a little bit today, the end of Chronicles 1, and where this sense of community comes from. We even looked at Mishnah and the Talmud on Brachot. We saw some of the rabbinic literature on this, and where the notion of the minyan comes from, and how we understand praying in community. But it's really important for us to come back to this for a moment and to talk about this and to identify for ourselves before we start today that the Baruch Hu is the launching point in the morning prayer and in the evening prayer on both elements of the day. It is the launching point of our formal communal prayer. Right? We looked at prayer, we talked about prayer in a number of different ways before. We looked at prayer and we talked about prayer, for example, in the context of, if you like, spontaneous prayer, informal prayer, the prayer of Hannah, the prayer of a whole number of other, Jacob and Hannah and a whole number of others, prayers that occur at the moment, that arise out of fear, out of a desire for something, prayers that occur in a particular moment, where we don't always know the words that are being uttered. The words aren't always recorded. Where there isn't a formality to the prayer. It's not particularly important to do the prayer in community, to engage the prayer in community. It occurs alone. It doesn't matter where it takes place. It can occur outside, it can occur indoors. We don't know. This is different. The Baruch Hu is about formal prayer in community, with a quorum, with a particular set of rituals, with physical movement. You have to hear it, you have to respond to it. The words we utter are important. This is about our switch to formal prayer. Yes, am I right? Here we are in a different place with regard to prayer. There's a formality to it that is communal, that is collective, with joint purpose, which, as we saw in Chronicles 1, at the end of the book of Chronicles 1, relates to the building of the temple, goes back to the building of the first temple, the prayer of David for Solomon. You remember what we spoke about a couple of weeks ago. Yes? This is what the Baruch Hu, at the end of the day, goes back to. The notion of that minyan, that kind of community building. Yes? So far, so good? All of this ought to sound familiar? Yes? Yes, good, good. So now that we have kind of reviewed this, let's move forward with regard to the Baruch Hu. And what's really also interesting about the Baruch Hu is that it serves multiple purposes. A couple of the purposes we are starting to identify, but a couple of the purposes we spoke about it being a launch of our prayer, the call to prayer, right? The Baruch Hu is a call to prayer, but it is also the blessing over the Torah. You know, when we take out the Torah scroll and we have an aliyah, what do the people say in the aliyah? The Baruch Hu. Baruch Hu et Adonai Amvorach, Baruch Adonai Amvorach leolam, right? we say the Baruch Hu, right? It's exactly the same formula of words. So it serves not only the purpose of a call to prayer, but it serves as the blessing for the Torah. It serves, in fact, we will see, multiple purposes. Now, there is something going on here, right? Do we use the Aleinu for various purposes? Not really. Do we use the language, if you like, of the Amida for various purposes? No. I mean, there are a whole number of different prayers that are unique, right? This we use in multiple ways. And that's what I want to talk about for a moment today. I want to think about what we're doing with the Baruch Hu, and what is it that makes it not only a call to prayer, but the blessing over the Torah. And I think that we can learn something from this and we can connect with this in a particular way. So why did the rabbis decide that this is going to be the blessing over Torah? How did this come about? What do we make of this, and where does this come from? And not only where does this come from, but eventually what does this mean to us? The rabbis identify two main texts, biblical texts, that mean to the rabbis that the Baruch Hu needs to be the blessing for the reading of the Torah. Text number one is Deuteronomy chapter 32, which is the Torah portion of Ha'azinu, the last song of Moses. Moses' last, if you like, spiritual testament, and the spiritual testament in the form of a poem. And it's chapter 32. I don't know what page we're on, but it's, and that, I'm sorry? 325, page 325. Thank you. And it's this Torah portion which is in poetic form, very dense, extraordinary language. We spoke about it a couple of times in different ways before, and we're going back to it now. Can you see? Can you see this, Michael and Zoya? Is this? Okay. 32, and what does it say? Ha'azinu shamayim va'adabera, right? Listen the heavens, right? Moses is asking for the whole world, the whole of the universe to bear witness to what Moses is saying. Asking the heavens to bear witness to what he's saying. Right? The notion of let the words of my mouth fall like rain. Right? The notion of the natural world being incorporated into this, right? And the English translation doesn't quite do justice to the Hebrew poetry, which is extraordinary. May my speech distill like the dew, like showers on young growth, like droplets on the grass. And then Moses says, Beshem Adonai Ekra, Shem Adonai Ekra, Havu Godel Adonai, right? I will call the name of God. Offer greatness, offer glory to God. I will call the name of God, you offer greatness or glory to the name of God. In other words, this last spiritual testament of Moses, which is Torah, this is revelation. In the words of Moses, can only function if I, Moses, says Moses here in chapter 32 of Deuteronomy, call upon the name of God, if I mention the name of God, and when I mention the name of God, you, the community, give glory or give greatness to God. In other words, I cannot do this alone. There is no way my testament, there's no way my legacy, there's no way this tradition is going to be passed on if I am the only one speaking it. Something has to happen here in the context of which I say the name of God and you proclaim the greatness of God. You proclaim the glory of God. This cannot be just me. Not only is it not just me, it cannot just be the rain and the dew and the heavens and the earth. It has to be this community. And what is it about? It is about the survival of Torah. The survival of Torah. The survival of the tradition. The survival of the legacy. These are Moses' last words. These are the last chapters of the book of Deuteronomy, his last poem towards his last blessing. This is it. This is it. And Moses departs the scene. Yes? And Moses goes on, and as if this weren't clear enough from this particular verse, right? And the rabbis write about this, and they discuss this, and it's, right? God is just, God is good, but you need to proclaim the glory of God, right? And then Moses goes further and says, in the very same song, in the very same, who created everything here? Who has enabled us, all of us together, to be here? If anyone, who but God has been able to do this, to ensure that we would be here, right? Talking about all of this. It's not only a matter of remember the days of old, consider the years of ages past, but ask your parents. Ask your parents. Ask your elders. Ask previous generations. And what happens when you ask previous generations? Ask your parents and they will inform you. Ask your elders, they will tell you. What needs to happen here? A call and response. And a call and response that is transcendent. And what is this call and response? It's intergenerational. It's not only transcendent and intergenerational. It's with a parent. It's with our elders who are here, and our elders who are here and not quite here. Our parents who are with us and who are not with us, whom sometimes we continue to speak to. In other words, really a conversation with transcendence. And it is that conversation through which we learn, through which we connect with that which is timeless, with that which is beyond us, and with the gift of us being here and being able to talk about this. Moses is saying this before leaving, before departing the scene. This is his last message to the Israelites, to the Hebrews. This is how tradition is passed on. We know this. There is something profoundly deep and moving and meaningful about these words. And the rabbis take these words, they read them, and they say, we know what this means. This means that when we call to prayer and when we bless the Torah of Moses, when we come up for an aliyah, we must proclaim the greatness of God. And through proclaiming the greatness of God and reading the words of the legacy of the tradition of Moses, we connect with this tradition, with previous generation. We hear the voices of our parents, of our elders. We bring them back to life. We express our gratitude for being here. And we bring everything back to life. So to begin with, the rabbis ask themselves the question, what is the blessing over the Torah? What is it that we say when we take out the Torah? They point to Ha'azinu. They point to Deuteronomy chapter 32. Shem Adonai ekra havu godel Adonai, the name of God I will call. Give glory, give greatness to the name of God. This and the whole of Ha'azinu that follows is the indication we should have a call and response when we take out the Torah from the ark and when we have an aliyah. We should recognize what it is that we're doing. Okay, Michael.
Thank you very much for this invitation. Sure. All the time I was asking a question. Why we, member of congregation, on Shabbat, have to bless the Torah? Who are we to bless? I never got the answer. My second question is for suggestion. During the high holidays, when the people invited to Elliot to do blessing on the Torah, it would be a better idea if Rabbi take 2 minutes prior to this, within an event explanation, what does it mean that they will do, what they're going to do, and how important it is. The people are going saying, I guarantee you, 99.9% people don't know what.
Well, thank you for this, Mike.
What you're doing, what does it mean
Thank you.
around you, it does not have any sense.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm going to repeat what you said, the 2 points that you made. I'm going to repeat the 2 points that you made so that people at home can hear them. Number one, you said you hadn't understood before what the Aliyah meant and why we are blessing the Torah the way we do in the Aliyah, which this starts to explain. And this is only the beginning of the explanation. This is the core, the central pillar of the explanation, but it's only the beginning. And second, it would be a good idea to teach more about this to the whole congregation at a moment like the High Holy Days so that people know what we're doing and how significant this is. Well, this is one of the reasons I do what I do. Because it is significant, it is meaningful, and every single time it moves me. And it's important for me to communicate this. And I take your suggestion. I think it's an important suggestion. So let me move forward. This was the first text.
But he's also asking, who are we? Did I hear you say, who are we to bless the Torah?
Who are we? We are the ones who proclaim the greatness of God. Who are we? We are the one who asks our elders, who asks our parents, and they tell. This is who we are. We have a voice. We have a place here. And without us, there is no covenant. Without us, there is no legacy. Without us, there is no Torah. And without us, our children and grandchildren will have no Torah. If we don't say, Baruch hu et Adonai Hamvorach, where is Torah? If we don't take the Torah out and read the Torah, where is Torah? If we don't speak to our children and grandchildren about our parents and our elders, about our legacy, where is it? This is what Moses is telling us here in Ha'azinu, in chapter 32 of the book of Deuteronomy. Thank you for clarifying that, Deborah. Who are we to utter the blessing? Well, if we don't utter the blessing, who will? And how will this survive? How will the legacy survive? How will Torah with a capital T survive? Yes? Okay, Deborah.
It's quick. I've heard it said this way, without God, man cannot, and without man, God cannot.
Without God, man cannot. Without man, God cannot. I'm willing to accept it. Okay. I'm willing to accept it genderless. I'm willing to accept it. Okay. Let us move forward. Text number 2, and this is what we learned in Ha'azinu put into action. Nehemiah chapter 8. Does anyone know what page we're on? this is toward the end of the scriptures, Nehemiah chapter 8. What happens in Nehemiah chapter 8? The children of Israel are returning from Babylonian exile to Jerusalem. There are a bunch of returnees. There are many, many returnees. Thousands of returnees return from Babylonia to Jerusalem, though most of the Jews of the exile remain in Babylonia. There are many who return. There are thousands who return. They're a minority, but there are nevertheless a large number who return. They return to Jerusalem. They start to clean up Jerusalem. They have a religious moment in Jerusalem. They are led by two leaders, Ezra and Nehemiah, right? The books of Ezra and Nehemiah. The book of Ezra first, the book of Nehemiah second. We are now on Nehemiah chapter 8. What page are we on? Does anyone? 1519. We're on page 1519. And Nehemiah takes out the scroll of the law. Nehemiah takes out the Torah. And where is he standing? Where the temple once stood. And he's taking out the Torah. And look at what happens here. The entire people assembled as one in the square before the water gate. Sha'ar HaMayim. They asked Ezra the scribe to bring the scroll of the teaching of Moses with which God charged Israel. On the first day of the 7th month. What is the first day of the 7th month? Rosh Hashanah. The first month is Nisan, the month of Passover, right? The 7th month is Tishrei, the month of Rosh Hashanah. The first day of the 7th month is Rosh Hashanah. Now you know where Rosh Hashanah comes from. This is the time Rosh Hashanah comes from. This is where we start to celebrate, to really mark Rosh Hashanah, right? The beginning of the period of the Second Temple. The beginning of the return, right? The rituals associated with the return from the Babylonian exile. The first day of the 7th month, Ezra the priest brought the teaching before the congregation, men and women. If anyone tells you there were only men there, everybody all together, people who could understand. Everybody all together, people with understanding, right? And he read it facing the square before the water gates. The ears of all the people were given to the scroll of the teaching. He read, the people listened, the people heard. I'm going to come back to this. Really important, right? Ha'azinu, the words of Moses. What does Moses' song start with? Hear me, listen to me, ha'azinu, right? Listen to me with your ears. Ozen is ear. Ha'azinu, hear me with your ears, right? Nehemiah writes, Ezra read, everybody heard with their ears. Everybody heard him, yes? A significant piece here, right? He stood up on a wooden tower made for that purpose, and beside him stood the notables all the way. He opened the scroll in the sight of all the people, opened it, and what did everybody do? Everyone stood up. Now you are starting to see what it is that we're doing. When the Torah comes out, we all stand up. Ezra blessed God. Ezra uttered the blessing. Ezra blessed God. And all the people answered. And what did the people do? Did they just stand up? They bowed down and prostrated. They bowed down. Do you remember what we do with the Baruch Hu? We stand up and we bow down. And they bowed down and prostrated themselves before the sovereign God with their faces to the ground. You bow down and you point your face to the ground. Yes?
So the bowing down seems to be a fairly new thing in Reform Judaism. We didn't grow up doing that, and I'm curious as to when this came about in the services.
Thank you, Judy. Wonderful question. Reform Jews, for many generations, did not bow down. They did not bow down. This has returned to our services within the last 30 to 40 years, depending on where we are. This is only something that's returned to Reform Judaism in the latter part of the 20th century. If you had gone to the services of Rabbi Abba Hillel Silver and Daniel Jeremy Silver, there was no bowing down. In fact, our Friday night services into the late 1980s, early 1990s, so we're not talking about a very long time ago, right? Past the fall of the Soviet Union, right? I mean, this is relatively recent. What we're talking about, our Friday evening services were Vespers services. They were approximately 30 minutes long. And the reading of the Torah took place from a very large book that was in English. It was the translation of the Torah in English. And people would come and they would read. And there was no bowing down. There was no, right? There was no taking out of the Torah. There was, all of these things did not take place. For our congregation, the changes that we're talking about are changes that occurred within the past 35 years. Within the past 35 years. In other congregations, 40 years, maybe a little bit longer, but the latter part of the 20th century. What happened? What happened? And why is this the case? And I'm only going to respond to this very briefly because I want to cover other material. Reformed Jews have understood since the middle of the 19th century that while the words of Deuteronomy and the words of Nehemiah and all of these are words that are inspired by transcendence, that the words of the Pentateuch, the words of the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, could not be understood to have been delivered by God to Moses on Mount Sinai. The text was redacted. It was edited. The text must have been written by human beings. There are passages in our Hebrew Bible, and we looked at some of those passages, the Noah story, other stories, that have parallels in other ancient Near Eastern literature. This cannot just be a matter of revelation the way the rabbis had described for thousands of years. So while we look to transcendence, we do not understand the words of Torah to be words that were given to Moses by God directly at Mount Sinai. The question is, how do you pray and try to achieve transcendence, while at the same time being able to face the reality of the text that you are studying, not being text that was verbatim dictated by God to Moses at Mount Sinai? How do you communicate that? And the response of Reform Judaism for generations is, you communicate values. The values of justice, the values of fairness, the values of mercy, the values of care for one another, the values that are the characteristics, if you like, of transcendence, of what we understand to be our God. The bowing down, the rituals associated with all of this, were deemed to be a distraction from those values. And it is only in the second part of the 20th century that Reformed Jews say, well, wait a minute, we get it, we understand it, we do embrace the values, but the standing up and the bowing down and the recitation of the Baruch Hu and the reading from the scroll also have a function from us. These also elevate us. And it is at this point that these return to the Reform ritual. Not instead of, but in addition to. This is a response as it were standing on one foot. This is the very tip of the fork that I'm off, because I don't want to belabor this. But great question, Judy. Thank you. Thank you for asking the question. Yes? Let's move forward. You see what happened here in Nehemiah. Now you understand where our rituals come from with regard to the blessing of the Torah and the aliyah of the Torah. But let's move forward. The rabbis point to yet another text, a really important other text. And it's a favorite of mine. I have many favorites, but it's a favorite of mine, and I'm thrilled to share it with you. It's Psalm 103. Turn to the Psalms. Psalm 103. If there is any psalm that offers us a theological view of our prayer, it's Psalm 103. If you want to understand the theology underlying our prayer, it's Psalm 103. Then the psalm you need to study is Psalm 103 and the rabbinic writing on it. This is it. It summarizes the theology of our prayer. Take a look at Psalm 103. What page are we? 1228. Thank you, Margie. Page 1228. It's a magnificent psalm. Le David, for David, or to David, or by David. This is how it starts. You will notice there's some Isaiah language in the psalm. There's parallels with Isaiah. It's a magnificent psalm. The whole start of the psalm is, bless our sovereign God, O my soul, all my being, God's holy name. Bless God, O my soul. Do not forget all of God's bounties. Do not forget God's gifts. This is the beginning, and this is the end of the psalm. The psalm is framed. It's a magnificent piece of poetry where it starts and it ends with a very same theme. Yes? Bless God, my soul, and bless God for all the bounties. What does God represent here for us? What here, all of this, what does all of this relate to, right? We spoke about God as parent. We spoke about God in tradition. We spoke about God in transcendence, right? Here we're into God and forgiveness, right? God and goodness, God and mercy, and God standing for the goodness of life, for our ability to be here and the goodness of life, right? The idea is that you are offered, each of you, each of us are offered with those gifts that allow for our youth to, in one way or another, be renewed like the eagles. In other words, we get up in the morning, we're able to stand, we're able to get dressed, we're able to face the day. There is something that happens that we must not take for granted, that enables us to continue with life in a way that is miraculous in the sense that it's passing. As long as it's here, it's a miracle. We cannot simply cast our gaze elsewhere and not look at it. We must be able to face it. We must be able to understand it. Jordan, can we close the doors? I'm continuing with this very briefly because we have other material to cover, but I'm going to go through this quickly. The righteous acts, the compassion and the graciousness and the slowness to anger, the steadfast love, all of these are God. God stands for life, love, mercy, and goodness. This is God. This is the God that we pray to. This is the God of goodness that we pray to. This is the God of life that we pray to, right? And, right? we are imperfect. We have sinned. We don't deserve this. But God has dealt with us in a way that is better than what we deserve. God has not repaid us for all our sins. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. Otherwise, this isn't what it would all be about, right? But this is the greatness of God's love towards those who recognize God. In other words, life, love, mercy are associated with forgiveness and with recognizing that we benefit from something with regard to which we are not deserving. No one promised us life. No one promised us goodness. No one promised us we would be here today. There was no guarantee. And we are here today. And there's a miracle about this. There is something remarkable about this. And we need to recognize it. We need to see it. And what is this at the end of the day about? It is about God's capacity to forgive. It is about God's capacity to show mercy. It is about God's love and God as a life-giving source. This is the prayer of David. This, if you like, in a nutshell, is a summary of the theology that underlies our prayer. And I could go on about this at far greater length and go into the rabbinic writings on this and really talk about this. That this is a whole other course. And how we manage this, how we understand this, how this fits into our world, how this fits into our life, I can't go into this right now. We could talk about this, but we're not going to. But I want to show this to you. I want you to hear this and to see this. Yes? And here comes the crux of this, right? Of this part of the psalm. Like a parent. Like a father. Like a parent who has compassion for children, so God has compassion for those who fear God. God is the unseen. God is the unpresent and present parent. We're back to the parents. We're back to the Torah portion of Ha'azinu. This is what we're back to. This is our prayer. This is what our prayer is about. This is it. This is the core of it. Yes? God knows how we are formed. God is mindful that we are dust. We know that we are mortal. We know that there is no permanent place for us. We know all of this. Isaiah. We're back to Isaiah. We're back to the language of Isaiah. Chapter 40, I could go on and on. But God's steadfast love is for all eternity. It is associated with love. And where does this end? What does this lead us to? The end of the chapter, the end of the psalm. Where does David land? Where does the psalmist land? Baruch hu et Adonai, bless the sovereign God. Baruch hu et Adonai. Oh, God's angels, malachim, it says. The angels of God, right? We're going to come back to this. Angels of God, mighty creatures who do God's bidding, ever hearing God's bidding. Doing God's bidding, ever hearing God's bidding. Does this start to ring bells? Angels of God, hearing God, but hearing God after doing God's bidding. Doing first, hearing second. Right? God's angels doing and then hearing. Yes? Bless the sovereign God, Baruch hu et Adonai, all of Tzvaot, the hosts of God, right? Servants who do God's will. Bless the sovereign God, all of God's works, Maaseh Adonai, the works of God, God's creations. Who does this relate to? Who does this refer to, right? And where does this end? The angels, the hosts, God's creations. Where does all of this end? Blessed Baruch Hu et Adonai, my soul. Where does this end? Why do we bless God? Baruch Hu et Adonai, my soul. It's unbelievable. The heavens, the angels, no. It's about my soul. Does this start to ring any bells? Are we starting to make connections with regard to the Baruch Hu? Baruch Hu et Adonai, and what it is that we're saying, and why it is that we're saying it, and why is it that this is the blessing for Torah? Do you see what it says here with regard to the angels? What about the angels, mighty creatures who do God's bidding, and then ever hearing God's bidding, who do God's bidding, osim, and then hear God's bidding? Does this ring any bells? Exodus chapter 24, the giving of the Torah. The giving of the Torah. Moses is receiving the Torah from God on Mount Sinai. This is the moment. The giving of the Torah to the people Israel. Right? Yes? And God says to Moses, come up, right? And the 70 elders are in, bow down from afar. And Moses alone shall come near, the others shall not come near, not come up the mountain. And Moses is receiving all of these commandments of God and repeating all of these to the people, right? This is the Torah, this is the moment of the giving of the Torah, of the creation of the covenant, right? And the people answer with one voice saying, all the things that God has commanded, we will do. And Moses wrote all of these things down. How do I know this? It's right there in the ark. I have it on my Torah scroll. What is our theology, the traditional theology of Judaism? Moses wrote all of this down. It's right here on the scroll in the ark, right? He wrote everything, the 5 books of Moses, in one morning. And then set an altar and the 12 pillars for the 12 tribes of Israel. That is the moment of the covenant, right? Everything is now written down. This is our written Torah, Torah shebichtav, as opposed to the rabbinic Torah, which is the oral Torah, Torah shebe'al peh. Moses takes the written record of the covenant. Moses takes the Torah, the way Ezra did, standing on the wooden platform. Moses takes the Torah. And what do all the people say when he reads to them the Torah? What does he say? All that God has spoken, we will faithfully do, na'aseh, v'nishma, and then we hear. First we do, and then we hear. You remember the Psalm 103, the angels. Yes? Who do God's bidding and then hear God's bidding. What did the people of Israel say here? At the time of the giving of the Torah, at the time of the covenant, we will do and we will hear. First the doing, then the hearing. Right? I'm going to mention one other thing here to connect all the pieces together. We're at the point of tying all of this together. The prophet Haggai. Before Ezra, the prophet Haggai, the 10th prophet of the 12 so-called minor prophets. The prophet Haggai, the book has 2 chapters. 2 chapters. One prophecy, but really critical prophecy of the prophet Haggai. Everybody skips over Haggai. People don't quite recognize how important the prophet Haggai is. What happens at the beginning of the prophecy of Haggai? The temple has been destroyed. The temple of Solomon. The temple that we read about, David praying with regard to Solomon at the end of the book of Chronicles 1, remember chapter 29, the end of book Chronicles 1, David was praying that Solomon may have the wisdom of God and build that temple, and the description of community and how everybody will contribute to the building of the temple. Remember we spoke about this? Yes? Well, the temple was destroyed and the people are in exile. And what is everybody saying? Do we have a King David? Do we have a King Solomon? Do we have an independent country? Do we have, how are we going to do this? The temple is destroyed. We may be able to go back to the land of Israel, but are we going to build the temple? How are we going to build the temple? Who are we to build the temple? Right? We can't build the temple. The time has not come for the temple to be rebuilt, for the rebuilding of the house of God. Right? This is what everybody's saying. Yes? Can we understand it? Of course we can understand it. Right? And the word of God comes through the prophet Haggai. Haggai the prophet says to the people, and I use the word prophet for a reason. Haggai the prophet says to the people, are you happy living in your comfy homes? Everything good? You like your paneled houses? You like your eat-in kitchens? It's nice to watch your TV in the den? Yeah? You like to listen to music in your living rooms? What about my home? Says God. What about the home for transcendence? What about the home for what community ought to be? What about home that represents what society ought to be, what the world ought to be? What about my home? You guys good in your homes? You warm? On a day like this, you're going to start maybe a wood fire in the fireplace, have a glass of wine. You happy? What about my home? And the people are saying, wait a minute, what do we have here? Do we have a kingdom? Do we have a king? Do we have priests? We don't have, what do we mean? How are we going? Are we David? Are we Solomon? How are we going to build the temple? And God is saying, wait, you guys happy? What about me? What about everything that I represent? What about everything that transcendence represents? What about my home? What about my temple? And then God says, consider how you have been faring. This is one of the most moving moments in the Hebrew Bible, period. What are you running after? You eat a meal, what happens? It fills you up for a moment, and then 3, 4, 5, 6 hours later, what happens? You're hungry. You drink a glass of water, you feel good. What happens an hour, 2, 3, 4, 5 later? What happens? You're thirsty again. You work. What happens? You bring in all of this stuff, you need more again. Right? What happens here? You earn all of this money and you find your wallet or purse is leaky. You always need more. What are you running after? What really are you pursuing? The Haggai. Go up to the hills and get timber and rebuild the house. I will look with favor, I will be glorified, because my house which lies in ruins, while you all hurry up to do your own houses. This is why the skies have withheld the life life-giving moisture, the life-giving humidity that we need. And the moisture is not moisture. Yes? What a remarkable prophecy. Zerubbabel, son of Shaltiel, ben Shaltiel, the high priest, Joshua ben Yotzadak, and all the, okay. The people feared God. And Haggai, it says in the text, God's angel. I said prophet before. Here it says God's angel, who was fulfilling God's mission, spoke to the people. And what did he say to the people? I am with you, says God. So, I want to ask you the question. Back to Psalm 103, the end of Psalm 103. Who are the angels? Are we completely past being angels? If Haggai could be an angel, a human being, a prophet, who are the angels? If the people of Israel, while receiving the Torah, could say, we will do and we will hear, they were all human beings. Who are the angels? Why are we saying, Baruchu et Adonai Hamvorach? Why do we respond? Why do we stand up? Why do we bow down? Because this is all we have left. Because for a moment, as we utter these words, the rabbis hope, reading all of this, that the world of the angels and our world will connect. That we will feel a sense of agency. We will feel a sense of connectedness, of relationship with parents, with elders, with those who are here and those who are not here. That we will appreciate this legacy, that we will appreciate Torah with a capital T, that we will understand the gift of us being here, and that we will be empowered to change the world, to go and build God's house here in this world. This is the function of the Baruch Hu. This is why we recite the Baruch Hu when we take out the Torah. This is why the Baruch Hu is the call to prayer. And we didn't know it. But now we do. Now we have a sense of it. Now we have a sense of where it comes from. That's what I wanted to share with you today. So thank you for joining me.